Dr. Humiliates Neil Diamond without knowing. He is the hospital's majority shareholder. A world-famous singer walks into an emergency room with his sick daughter and gets treated like trash. The doctor mocks him, dismisses his concerns, and makes him wait for hours while others get seen first. But what this arrogant doctor doesn't know will cost him everything. You'll see how one man's prejudice led to his downfall, how Neil Diamond's quiet dignity spoke louder than any words, how a father's love for his daughter revealed the true character of everyone involved, and how karma came back in the most unexpected way. A doctor humiliates Neil Diamond without knowing he is the hospital's majority shareholder, and what happens next will shock you. It was a rainy Tuesday night in Los Angeles, 2015. The kind of heavy rain that floods the streets and makes driving dangerous. Cedar Hills Medical Center, one of the most prestigious hospitals in Southern California, was busy as always. The emergency room was packed with people, car accident victims from the slick roads, elderly people with pneumonia from the cold and damp, children with high fevers. Nurses rushed from room to room, doctors barked orders, machines beeped constantly. It was organized chaos, the normal rhythm of a major hospital emergency department. At 11:30 that night, a black SUV pulled up to the emergency room entrance. The passenger door opened and Neil Diamond stepped out into the pouring rain. He was 74 years old, his silver hair quickly getting soaked despite the umbrella he held. But Neil wasn't worried about himself. He rushed to the back door of the SUV and carefully helped his daughter out. Marjorie Diamond, 48 years old, Neil's eldest daughter from his first marriage. Marjorie was doubled over in pain, clutching her stomach, her face pale and sweating despite the cold rain. Neil had been visiting Marjorie at her home that evening when she suddenly collapsed with severe abdominal pain. She couldn't stand up straight, couldn't stop vomiting, was crying from the intensity of the pain. Neil immediately called 911, but was told the wait time for an ambulance was over an hour due to the storm and multiple accidents. He couldn't wait an hour. His daughter needed help now, so he carefully got her into his SUV and drove to Cedar Hills Medical Center himself, ignoring the dangerous road conditions, focused only on getting Marjorie to a hospital. Neil half-carried, half-dragged Marjorie through the automatic doors into the emergency room. The waiting area was crowded with at least 40 people. Some were bleeding, some were coughing, some were crying. All were waiting. Neil helped Marjorie into a chair and then went straight to the check-in desk, where a tired-looking nurse sat behind a plexiglass window. "My daughter needs help immediately. She has severe abdominal pain. She's been vomiting. She can barely stand. Please, she needs to see a doctor right away." Neil's voice was urgent but polite, respectful. The nurse barely looked up from her computer screen. "Fill out these forms and take a seat. We'll call you when it's your turn." She pushed a clipboard with papers through the slot in the plexiglass window. Neil took the clipboard but didn't move away from the desk. "You don't understand. She's in extreme pain. This could be appendicitis or something serious. She needs to be seen now." The nurse finally looked up, her face showing irritation. "Sir, everyone here thinks their situation is an emergency. That's why it's called an emergency room. Fill out the forms and wait your turn like everyone else. Now please step aside. There are other people waiting." Neil wanted to argue, but Marjorie cried out in pain behind him. He quickly went back to her, helped her sit more comfortably and started filling out the forms. Name, date of birth, insurance information, medical history, current symptoms. His hands shook as he wrote, partly from worry and partly from anger at being dismissed so quickly. Marjorie leaned against his shoulder, moaning softly, tears streaming down her face. "Dad, it hurts so much." "I know, sweetheart. I know. We'll get you help. Just hold on." 20 minutes later, Neil returned the completed forms to the nurse. She took them without looking at him and added them to a large stack of other clipboards. Neil returned to Marjorie and waited. 30 minutes passed. Then an hour. People who had arrived after them were being called back to examination rooms. Neil went to the desk 3 more times, asking when his daughter would be seen. Each time he was told to be patient, that they were working as fast as they could, that a triage nurse would evaluate everyone in order of severity. At 1:15 in the morning, 90 minutes after they arrived, a triage nurse finally called Marjorie's name. Neil helped her stand, and they followed the nurse to a small room. The nurse took Marjorie's vital signs, blood pressure, temperature, pulse, asked a few quick questions about her symptoms, then told them to go back to the waiting room. A doctor would see her soon. Soon turned out to be another 45 minutes. Finally, at 2 in the morning, 2.5 hours after arriving at the hospital, Marjorie was called to an examination room. A real room with a bed and medical equipment. Neil helped her onto the bed, where she immediately curled into a fetal position, still clutching her stomach. A nurse came in, asked the same questions the triage nurse had already asked, typed notes into a computer, told them a doctor would be in shortly. Shortly turned out to be another 30 minutes. At 2:30 in the morning, the doctor finally entered, Dr. Richard Morrison. 42 years old, tall and thin, with perfectly styled dark hair and an expression of permanent superiority. He wore expensive designer glasses and a white coat, so crisp and clean it looked like it had never been worn before. Dr. Morrison had graduated from Harvard Medical School, had done his residency at Johns Hopkins, and never let anyone forget it. He was brilliant but arrogant, skilled but condescending, successful but utterly lacking in compassion. Doctor. Morrison glanced at the computer screen showing Marjorie's information, then looked at her curled up on the bed, then at Neil standing beside her. He didn't introduce himself, didn't ask how they were doing, didn't show any warmth or concern, just started firing questions in a bored, irritated tone. What's the problem? When did the pain start? Where exactly is the pain? Have you eaten anything unusual? Any history of abdominal issues? Neil tried to answer for Marjorie when she was too overwhelmed with pain to speak clearly, but Dr. Morrison cut him off sharply. I'm talking to the patient, not you. Sir, if you can't let her answer for herself, you'll need to leave the room. Neil bit back an angry response, forced himself to stay calm. I'm her father. I'm staying. I'm just trying to help because she's in too much pain to... I don't care who you are, this is my examination room and you'll follow my rules or you'll leave. Am I clear? The disrespect in Dr. Morrison's voice was shocking. Neil had been famous for over 50 years, had met presidents and royalty, had been treated with respect and admiration everywhere he went. But he didn't care about any of that right now. He only cared about getting help for Marjorie. So he swallowed his pride and nodded. I understand. I'm sorry, please just help my daughter. Dr. Morrison performed a quick physical examination of Marjorie's abdomen, pressing on different areas while asking if it hurt. Marjorie cried out when he pressed on her lower right side. Dr. Morrison made a note on his tablet, but his expression remained dismissive. It's probably just indigestion or gastritis. Maybe food poisoning. Nothing serious. I'll prescribe some antacids and pain medication. You can go home. Neil couldn't believe what he was hearing. Doctor, with all due respect, this is clearly more serious than indigestion. She can barely stand. The pain is severe and localized. Shouldn't you do some tests? Maybe a CT scan or blood work to rule out appendicitis? Dr. Morrison looked at Neil with undisguised contempt. Are you a doctor? No? Then don't tell me how to do my job. I've examined thousands of patients with abdominal pain. I know the difference between something serious and someone overreacting to a stomachache. Marjorie tried to speak up. Doctor, please. I've never felt pain like this before. Something is really wrong. I can feel it. Dr. Morrison rolled his eyes. Everyone thinks their pain is special. Everyone thinks they're the exception. Trust me, you'll be fine. Take the medication, rest, and if it's not better in a few days, see your regular doctor. Now I have actual emergencies to attend to. Neil felt anger rising in his chest. This doctor was dismissing his daughter's pain without proper investigation, without running any tests, without taking her seriously. He stepped forward, trying to keep his voice level. Dr. Morrison, I'm asking you as a father who's terrified for his daughter. Please run some tests. Please make sure this isn't something serious. We've been waiting for hours. Surely you can take a few more minutes to be thorough. Dr. Morrison's face flushed with anger. Oh, I see what this is about. You've been waiting for hours and now you think you deserve special treatment. You think because you're upset, your daughter should jump to the front of the line ahead of people who are actually seriously ill. That's not how medicine works. That's not how this hospital works. You're not special just because you're demanding. Neil was stunned. He wasn't demanding special treatment. He was asking for basic medical care, for tests that would be routine for someone with Marjorie's symptoms. But before he could respond, Dr. Morrison continued his tirade. "And frankly, you look like someone who probably doesn't even have proper insurance. I noticed your daughter's insurance is a basic plan. This is one of the most expensive hospitals in Los Angeles. Maybe you should have gone to a county hospital where they have more time for cases like this." The classism and prejudice in that statement took Neil's breath away. Dr. Morrison had looked at them, made assumptions, and decided they weren't worth his time or effort. Neil was wearing casual clothes, jeans and a sweater, nothing fancy, because he had rushed from Marjorie's house in an emergency. He hadn't bothered with his usual careful appearance, and apparently to Dr. Morrison, that meant he was poor, unimportant, unworthy of good medical care. Neil felt something he rarely felt. Pure rage, but he controlled it. Getting angry wouldn't help Marjorie. He tried one more time. "Doctor, please, I'm begging you, just run the tests. If I'm wrong and it's nothing serious, I'll apologize and pay for the tests myself. But if I'm right, and you send her home with something serious, she could die. Please." Dr. Morrison actually laughed, a short, cruel laugh. "Die? From a stomachache? You're being ridiculous and melodramatic. Look, I've wasted enough time here. The prescription will be sent to the pharmacy downstairs. Pick it up on your way out. The nurse will be in with discharge papers. And next time, maybe try some Pepto-Bismol before rushing to the emergency room." He turned to leave. Marjorie cried out again, a scream of pain so intense that even Dr. Morrison paused, but only for a second. Then he shook his head and walked out of the room. Neil stood there in shock. This doctor had just dismissed his daughter's obvious suffering without running a single test, had insulted them, talked down to them, made assumptions based on their appearance and insurance, had violated every principle of good medicine and human decency. The nurse came in with discharge papers, looked uncomfortable, like she disagreed with the doctor's decision, but couldn't say anything. Neil helped Marjorie sign the papers with a shaking hand, helped her off the bed, and slowly walked her out of the examination room. In the hallway, they passed Dr. Morrison, who was laughing with another doctor, telling a story about an overreactive patient who thought a stomachache was an emergency. Neil heard him say some people just want attention. They didn't even glance at Neil and Marjorie struggling past them. Neil got Marjorie back to the SUV and carefully helped her into the passenger seat. Started driving toward the pharmacy to pick up the prescribed medication that he knew wouldn't help. But they only made it 2 blocks from the hospital when Marjorie screamed, "Dad, stop! Something's wrong! Something's really wrong!" She clutched her stomach and then vomited violently, but this time there was blood in the vomit, dark blood that meant internal bleeding. Neil immediately turned the SUV around and raced back to Cedar Hills Medical Center, pulled up to the emergency entrance again, this time laying on the horn until staff came running out. "My daughter is vomiting blood. She needs help now." The staff took one look at Marjorie and immediately brought a gurney, rushed her back inside. This time, there was no waiting, no forms, no delays. She was taken straight to a trauma bay. A different doctor appeared, Dr. Sarah Chen, the head of emergency medicine. She took one look at Marjorie's condition and immediately ordered a CT scan and full blood panel. Stat. Within 10 minutes, Marjorie was in the CT scanner. Within 20 minutes, Dr. Chen had the results. She came out to the waiting area where Neil was pacing frantically. Her face was grave. "Mr. Diamond, your daughter has a ruptured appendix with severe peritonitis. Her appendix burst, probably within the last hour, and the infection is spreading through her abdominal cavity. She needs emergency surgery immediately or she will die. We're prepping the OR now. I need you to sign consent forms." Neil felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. His worst fears confirmed. Everything he had told Dr. Morrison, everything Morrison had dismissed and mocked was true. And now Marjorie's life was in danger because of that doctor's arrogance and negligence. Neil signed the consent forms with shaking hands. "How bad is it? Will she survive?" "Doctor," Chen put a hand on his shoulder. "We caught it in time. The surgery will be complicated because of the rupture and infection, but our surgical team is excellent. She has a good chance." But Mr. Diamond, I need to tell you something. If you had left the hospital like Dr. Morrison told you to, if you had gone home with those antacids, your daughter would likely have died in her sleep tonight. A ruptured appendix with peritonitis is fatal without surgery. Neil felt tears streaming down his face, tears of relief that they had come back, tears of rage at the doctor who had sent them away, tears of fear for his daughter who was being rushed into surgery. Dr. Chen saw his expression. I've already filed an incident report about Dr. Morrison's handling of your daughter's case. This is inexcusable. Appendicitis should never be dismissed as indigestion, especially with classic symptoms like your daughter presented. But right now, let's focus on getting her through surgery. You can wait in the surgical waiting room on the 4th floor. The surgery took 4 hours, the longest 4 hours of Neil Diamond's life. He sat in the waiting room alone, praying, remembering every moment of Marjorie's life from the day she was born to tonight, thinking about how close he had come to losing her because of one arrogant doctor's prejudice and negligence. Finally, at 7 in the morning, a tired but smiling surgeon came out. The surgery was successful. We removed the ruptured appendix, cleaned out the infection, and she should make a full recovery. She'll need to stay in the hospital for about a week for IV antibiotics, but she's going to be fine. Neil broke down crying with relief. Thank you. Thank God. Thank you so much. The surgeon patted his shoulder. She's a fighter, and you saved her life by bringing her back when you did. Another hour, and the outcome would have been very different. Neil was taken to the recovery room where Marjorie was slowly waking up from anesthesia. He held her hand and told her she was going to be okay, that the surgery was successful, that he loved her so much. Over the next few days, as Marjorie recovered in the hospital, Neil had time to think, time to process what had happened, time to decide what to do about Dr. Richard Morrison. Most people didn't know that Neil Diamond wasn't just a famous singer. He was also a very wealthy businessman and investor. Over his 50-year career, he had invested his money wisely in various ventures. One of those investments, made 10 years earlier in 2005, was in Cedar Hills Medical Center. When the hospital had been facing financial difficulties and potential closure, Neil had stepped in with a massive investment, $20 million that saved the hospital and allowed it to expand and modernize. In exchange, he received 45% ownership of the hospital corporation, making him the majority shareholder. But Neil had always been a silent partner, never interfering with operations, never using his position for personal benefit, never even publicizing his ownership. Most of the hospital staff had no idea who really owned the place they worked. Neil had invested in the hospital because he believed in its mission, believed in providing quality healthcare to the community. But what he had experienced with Dr. Morrison was the opposite of quality healthcare. It was negligence, arrogance, classism, and prejudice dressed up in a white coat. If Morrison treated Neil's daughter this way, how many other patients had he dismissed? How many other people had suffered because of his superiority complex? On Marjorie's 5th day in the hospital, Neil made a called the hospital's chief executive officer, Michael Stevens, and requested a meeting. Stevens was surprised and delighted to hear from the hospital's largest investor. Of course, Mr. Diamond, I'll come to you. Are you at home? Actually, I'm in the hospital. My daughter is a patient here. I'd like you to come to her room if possible. 30 minutes later, Michael Stevens arrived at Marjorie's room. He was shocked to learn that Neil Diamond's daughter had been a patient for 5 days and he hadn't known. More shocked when Neil told him the whole story. The dismissive treatment in the ER, Dr. Morrison's insults and assumptions, the dangerous misdiagnosis, the near-fatal consequences. Stevens's face grew darker with each detail. By the end, he looked like he might be sick. Mr. Diamond, I am horrified and ashamed. This is not the standard of care we strive for. This is not what your investment was meant to support. I assure you there will be consequences. Neil nodded. I want to see Dr. Morrison's file. I want to know if there have been other complaints. And I want to speak to him personally. Stevens had Dr. Morrison's employment file brought up within the hour. Neil read through it carefully, and what he found was disturbing. Over the past 3 years, there had been 17 formal complaints against Dr. Morrison, Complaints about rude behavior, dismissive treatment, failure to run appropriate tests, arrogance toward patients. 17 complaints. And yet, Dr. Morrison was still employed, still treating patients, still endangering lives with his attitude. Why wasn't he fired? Neil asked Stevens. Stevens looked uncomfortable. Dr. Morrison is brilliant, Harvard-educated, top of his residency class. He brings prestige to the hospital. And he's never been successfully sued because his misdiagnoses were always caught by other doctors before causing permanent harm, until now. The administration felt his value outweighed the complaints. Neil felt disgust rising. So you kept a doctor who treats patients terribly because he has an impressive resume? Because he hasn't killed anyone yet? That's your standard? Stevens had no good answer. Neil made a decision. I want Dr. Morrison in this room tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. And I want the entire board of directors present as well. We're going to have a conversation about the culture of this hospital. The next morning at exactly 9 a.m., Dr. Richard Morrison walked into Marjorie's hospital room. He had been told to meet with the CEO and board of directors regarding a patient complaint, but hadn't been told which patient. When he saw Neil and Marjorie, recognition flickered across his face, but he still didn't seem concerned. Just looked annoyed at having his morning disrupted. Behind Dr. Morrison filed in the hospital's CEO, the chief medical officer, and all 7 members of the board of directors. The small hospital room was crowded. Dr. Morrison looked around confused. What is this about? I have patients to see. Michael Stevens spoke. Dr. Morrison, do you remember this patient? He gestured to Marjorie in the bed. Morrison glanced at her, vaguely. Stomach pain case from a few nights ago. I prescribed antacids, told her to follow up with her regular doctor. Turned out fine. Turned out fine. Neil's voice was cold as ice. She nearly died. Dr. Morrison finally looked at Neil properly. Oh, you're the demanding father. Look, your daughter had a stomachache. I treated it appropriately. Morrison turned to the board members. I don't know what this is about, but this family is wasting everyone's time with false complaints. Dr. Chen, who had also been asked to attend, spoke up. Dr. Morrison, Marjorie Diamond, presented with classic symptoms of appendicitis, lower right quadrant pain, nausea, vomiting, fever. You dismissed her without running any tests. Her appendix ruptured less than an hour after you discharged her. She required emergency surgery and nearly died from peritonitis. Your misdiagnosis was life-threatening. Morrison's face showed a flicker of concern, but he quickly covered it with defensive anger. I see hundreds of patients. Not every stomachache is appendicitis. I made a clinical judgment based on my examination. Sometimes patients get worse after discharge. That doesn't mean I did anything wrong. You called her stomachache overreacting. Neil's voice was shaking with controlled fury. You mocked me for being concerned about my daughter. You made assumptions about us based on our appearance and insurance. You spent less than 5 minutes examining her before dismissing her pain as nothing. You violated every principle of good medicine. Dr. Morrison rolled his eyes. Oh, so this is what this is really about. You're upset that I didn't give you VIP treatment. You think because you're some kind of celebrity you should get special attention. Well, I don't care who you are. In my ER, everyone is treated the same. Everyone is treated the same? Neil pulled out a folder. This contains 17 formal complaints against you from the past 3 years. 17 patients who felt dismissed, disrespected, and inadequately treated by you. Does that sound like treating everyone the same? Or does it sound like you treat everyone with the same contempt? Morrison's face went pale. Where did you get that file? That's confidential personnel information. Michael Stevens spoke up. Mr. Diamond has every right to see that file. As the majority shareholder of this hospital, he has access to all personnel records. The room went silent. Dr. Morrison stared at Neil. What? You're the majority shareholder? Neil nodded slowly. I invested $20 million to save this hospital 10 years ago. I believed in its mission to provide excellent health care to everyone, regardless of their wealth or status. But you, Dr. Morrison, represent everything this hospital should not be. Arrogance, prejudice, negligence, cruelty. Morrison was stammering now. I didn't know if I had known who you were. And that's exactly the problem, Neil cut him off. You treated my daughter and me terribly because you assumed we were nobody important. If you had known I was wealthy and famous, you would have treated us differently. That's not medicine. That's classism. That's discrimination. And it has no place in healthcare." The chief medical officer spoke. "Dr. Morrison, your employment is terminated effective immediately. You will surrender your hospital credentials and leave the premises within the hour. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings." Morrison's face went from pale to red. "You can't fire me. I'm one of your best doctors. I went to Harvard. I've never been successfully sued." "Actually, we can fire you," Stevens said coldly. "Your contract has a clause allowing immediate termination for gross negligence or conduct unbecoming of the hospital's values. Nearly killing a patient through negligent misdiagnosis qualifies as gross negligence. And your treatment of patients, documented in 17 complaints, qualifies as conduct unbecoming. You're done here." Morrison looked around the room desperately. "This is because of him," he pointed at Neil. "Because he's rich and famous. If it had been anyone else, you wouldn't care." One of the board members, an elderly woman who had been silent until now, spoke up. "Dr. Morrison, I filed one of those 17 complaints against you 2 years ago when you treated my grandson for what you said was just a cold. It was actually pneumonia. He was hospitalized for a week. I'm not rich or famous. I'm just a grandmother who watched you almost kill her grandchild through arrogance. This isn't about Mr. Diamond's status. This is about your pattern of negligence." Dr. Morrison had nothing to say to that. Security arrived and escorted him out of the room. He left still sputtering about lawsuits and unfair treatment, but everyone knew he had no case. The evidence against him was overwhelming. After Morrison was gone, Neil addressed the remaining people in the room. "I want a complete review of every doctor in this hospital. I want patient complaint procedures improved and actually enforced. I want cultural training on treating all patients with respect, regardless of their appearance or insurance. And I want regular audits to ensure quality of care is maintained. If I'm going to be a majority shareholder, I'm going to make sure this hospital lives up to its mission." The board members all nodded agreement. Changes were implemented immediately. Over the next year, Cedar Hills Medical Center transformed its culture. 3 more doctors with complaint histories were let go. New training programs were implemented. Patient satisfaction scores improved dramatically. The hospital became known not just for medical excellence, but for compassionate care. Marjorie made a full recovery, was released from the hospital after 7 days, and healed completely over the next month. She never forgot how close she came to dying, and how her father's love and persistence saved her life. The experience brought them even closer together. As for Dr. Richard Morrison, he had difficulty finding another position after being fired. Word spread in the medical community about why he had been terminated. His arrogance and Ivy League credentials couldn't overcome his reputation for poor patient care. Last anyone heard, he was working at a small clinic in another state, hopefully having learned some humility. What do you think about this story? Have you ever been dismissed by a doctor or treated poorly by medical staff? Share your experiences in the comments below. This story of the doctor who humiliates Neil Diamond without knowing he is the hospital's majority shareholder teaches us important lessons. It teaches us that how you treat people when you think they're nobody shows your true character. That assumptions based on appearance or perceived social status are always wrong and often dangerous. That arrogance has no place in medicine or any profession meant to serve others. That money and prestige mean nothing if you don't have compassion and integrity. Dr. Morrison could have been a great doctor. He had the education, the skills, the knowledge, but he lacked the most important quality, basic human decency and respect for every patient regardless of who they were. And that lack cost him everything. Meanwhile, Neil Diamond, who could have used his wealth and fame to demand special treatment, only wanted the same quality care any patient deserved. He didn't reveal who he was to get better treatment. He revealed who he was to make sure the hospital he had invested in actually lived up to its values. That's the difference between using power for yourself versus using it to help others. The doctor humiliates Neil Diamond, doesn't know he's the majority shareholder, and learns the hardest lesson of his career. Treat everyone with respect. You never know who they are or who they might become. But more importantly, it shouldn't matter who they are. Every human being deserves dignity, compassion, and quality care.